Testing. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Not from the mic, right? All right, let's try that again.
Yep.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. First of all, hello, welcome. As some of you may know, the Libertarian Party is the only political party with a plank that supports nullification. So we're really proud of that, and this is a great timing for this sort of event with the legislative session starting up in January. We're very excited about that. I just want you to remember, as you listen to this, that now is the time to contact your representative, call them, email them, show up unannounced at their office, whatever you have to do, and remind them that nullification is a valid option, and in many ways the only option that we have for effective action. So while I'm still talking about action, I want to get Bo Zimmerman up here. He is the chair of the Williamson County park host of this event, and he's going to tell you about some events we have going on here in Williamson.
Thanks.
Yay, Bo.
Hello, everyone. I'm only going to take just a second of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am the chairman of the Williamson County Libertarian Party, and we host meetings once every month on the second Tuesday of the month, and would love for anyone to come out there if you'd like to get involved in local politics. We'd love to have you. That's all.
All right. For those of you who are coming from Austin, I'm the chair of the Travis County Libertarian Party, and we also would love to have you. We have meetings the first Tuesday of every month. Please just contact me, catch me afterward. If you're interested, we have several events coming up next spring. Love to see you. Now I'm going to introduce our illustrious panel. I'm going to start with Sheriff Richard Mack, right here. He is the sheriff who sued the feds over the Brady Bill and won. He's also the founder of the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officer Association, and a very well-known speaker on how sheriffs are the last line of resort in defense of citizens against federal tyranny. We're very happy to have him. Next is Kathy Glass, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She was the 2010 Libertarian nominee for governor. She ran an excellent campaign. She has stayed just as active, or more so, ever since. She's on the State Libertarian Executive Committee, where she's chair of the political committee. She's also the chair of the Harris County Libertarian Party. So we're happy to have her as well. Next is Clint Stutz. He is the coordinator of the Texas Nullification of Obamacare Working Group. He's getting some fabulous work done, really very action-oriented. We're very happy to have his expertise here tonight. Last but not least is Jason Rink. He is the executive director of the Foundation for a Free Society and the director of Nullification, The Rightful Remedy, a documentary he produced in partnership with the 10th Amendment Center. So we're very excited to have him. Let me tell you about the format for tonight. It is supposed to be a loosely moderated conversation. So for the first thing we'll do is give each speaker 2 minutes to answer the opening question, which I'll present at the very end, but which does involve nullification, oddly enough. So they'll get 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll have 35 minutes of open conversation amongst them. 30 minutes into that 35, I'll give you a 5-minute warning, just so you know, start wrapping it up. After that, we'll do another 2 minutes for each person so that you have a chance to say anything you feel didn't get said. From where I'm positioned, it's kind of hard for you to see me. I am going to give you, for whoever's speaking, a warning at the 20-second mark. That'll be a flashing something like this, and then when you get down to 0, I'll start pushing you off the stage like this. So that's good. Then after that 35 minutes of discussion, we'll move to audience participation, where you get to ask questions. And I'll go over that when we get to it. So the first part, 2 minutes each, we'll start with Sheriff Mack, is in response to this question. What should we nullify in Texas, and how do we go about it? What is the best method for making nullification happen now in Texas?
What should we nullify in Texas? That's kind of like after the Revolutionary War, when the Founding Fathers got together to decide on the Bill of Rights. They said, okay, how many rights do you want to declare that the government can never touch? They came up with 189. And they dwindled them down to 12, and then the states ratified the 10 that we have now today. I would say that's a pretty good way to start. Nullify everything that violates the Bill of Rights. You can start with the Second Amendment if you'd like. That's the easiest one. Isn't it amazing that we have 4 states in the Union that claim to have constitutional carry? Then what do the others have? Unconstitutional carry. And that's what we have in Texas. Texas has gun control. And let's make sure we understand, gun control in America, and might as well bring up my book at that time, The Magic of Gun Control has a chapter so titled, Gun Control in America is Against the Law. Okay? It doesn't matter if you can show statistics that it's okay or that it helps the cities be safer. Ask Detroit and Washington and New York, okay? It's ridiculous. But then I would say the first place to start, though, is with the easy one, and that's gun control, and then start going through the Bill of Rights and start nullifying the heck out of all of them that do not coincide with what the founders' intent was when they developed the Bill of Rights.
All right.
Well, of course, this is a target-rich environment. You can almost shoot your shotgun anywhere and hit something that was unconstitutional, but you do have to pick your battles and plan your strategies. And I think that go for the heavies. I don't think we have much choice but to try to nullify Obamacare, and I'm not going to steal Clint's thunder. I call it Obama tax now because there's no care in it. And Justice Roberts has made it clear it is a tax. But there's so many ways that that can be nullified, but this is the thing we need to know. I want to stress tonight that nullification is not just words on paper. It's not just making a declaration and say, fix that. No, it's having a mechanism to enforce it and the will to do so. And that's something we've got to do with this Obama tax fiend because it covers, it has so many tentacles in so many aspects of our lives. But then another thing I would say, things like NDAA, these are things that if we don't get it fixed, we're not going to survive. I mean, the TSA pat-downs, that's bad enough. But we could stop that. We should have stopped that. But there are things that are even worse than that. And of course, who knows what the TSA scenario is just a precursor for or a test for. So I would do things like Obama tax and NDAA and other, the very idea that government can snatch someone and hold them and never release them, not even own up to it. If we can't fight that, and I think Texans will, then we're probably not going to be able to fight much, but we can do this, and we need to.
Well, oddly enough, I'm going to copy off my neighbor here. Of course, Obama tax is at the top of my list, and really very close behind that is the TSA. But I chose Obamacare to target because that is the one issue you can build a pretty wide coalition against. If you're going to start a nullification movement and get people on board, just mentioning Obamacare in the same sentence with nullification gets them interested. I went to a 9/12 project meeting back, I think 3 Mondays ago, and there was about 150 people in the room. And at that point, there was a lot of talk about secession that had just really gotten into a fever pitch in the news. And I got an email from someone who was at that, who was on the board of that that group there. She said, first of all, we have to address the idea of secession, that it may not be the solution right now because there's a lot of people in our group that are really latching onto that. And so in my presentation, I said, okay, secession is, I believe, something that any free independent state can pursue, but I don't think it's the answer right now. And through my presentation, I convinced pretty much the whole crowd that nullification is the way to go, that we got to get on this now, and that we have an out-of-control federal government that doesn't see any limit to its power because we don't fight back.
Okay, so everybody's kind of like hit a lot of the big things. So I just want to springboard off of a couple of different things here. Number one, when people are asking me what we should nullify prior to the election, I said, well, it would depend on who came into office. Because what I believed would happen was that if Barack Obama was reelected, that Obamacare would become a rich target for nullification, because you would have sort of the popularity, the reaction against Obama. If Romney would have gotten elected, I think there would have been an opportunity possibly to go after something like NDAA, because the left tends to then become anti-war again, and they care about civil liberties again, that they forget about when their guy's in office. But I still think those things are both legitimate. I think what's important to keep in mind is public perception of an issue, how people feel about it, whether we've got advocates in the state legislature to champion a certain issue. I do believe that an NDAA nullification bill and a TSA bill are going to be put forward this legislative session, so I say let's go for those because those are already moving through the process. And one thing that Kathy sort of touched on that I want to also emphasize is that if we nullify a federal law but we don't have the political will with the executive branch, the governor, all those types of things to sort of enforce the teeth of that. For example, I think the NDAA legislation is going to be like a first Class A misdemeanor, which would involve fines and jail time for federal agents. Well, that's great, but if you don't have those in the state of Texas ready to back that up, then that nullification just gets nullified by the fact that it can't be enforced. So I think that's very important. And those are what I would focus on in Texas, is TSA, NDAA, and Obamacare. But I think the most important issue nationally, as far as nullification is concerned, is marijuana decriminalization. And, unfortunately, I don't think that's as likely to happen as Texas as in some other states, but we can try. And I think there are some plans to try for that as well this legislative session.
All right, now we'll go to the loose conversation. And just for the sake of having some sort of structure, let's start again back down here and see where it takes us. Sheriff Mack?
Okay. I would say Jason just hit something that really reminded me of my other book. Okay? and I'm not here peddling books, even though I am here signing them. If you want them, that's fine. But they are what I've dedicated my life to, and a lot of these things are so valuable tools. He talked about the political will, and is there somebody that will back it up? Well, we're working on that nationwide now through our CSPOA. She mentioned that I formed the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. We have some of this working now. We have a sheriff in Indiana who has threatened the FDA with the arrest of trespassing if they come back and bother people, Amish farmers and others, who don't pasteurize their milk. Isn't that my choice if I own the land? Isn't this amazing that we have Amish farmers with the audacity to think that they can put cows out in a pasture, let them eat grass, bring them in and milk them, and then consume the products derived therefrom? I know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. No wonder we have such an out-of-control country today, with farmers thinking they can do this kind of thing. And so now they're facing jail time for doing this. And I'm helping a Mennonite, and I'm helping an Amish farmer, and I'm helping somebody who really doesn't believe in God that much with that problem right now. And they're in 3 different states. And when I was asked to speak at the Kentucky Sheriff's Association convention, their banquet, I'm their speaker. There's 116 sheriffs there. There's 116 counties in Kentucky. I don't know why they need that many. But nevertheless, I got a local raw milk farmer to bring me some milk, and I drank illegal milk in front of everyone.
Sheriff Max, I just wanted to springboard off of that raw milk. You know, me and some friends of mine, I used to be in Ohio 2.5 years ago, so don't hold that against me. I came to greener pastures down here. But we used to joke in like 2007, 2008 that raw milk should become like the signature issue. We sort of were kidding about it, but really, the more asinine the law is, the more easily it is to show that wait a minute, isn't this ridiculous that the federal government is telling us whether or not we can consume raw milk? I think a lot of people really resonate when you are able to isolate these asinine sort of innocuous laws that tend to affect our liberty. Also, the more personal the law is.
Right.
So the more invasive it is to the average person. And I think it's really important as well as we're talking about how do we frame and how do we talk about issues and how do we actually go about nullifying it, is making sure that we're not making just intellectual arguments. The TSA is a great issue because why? It's patting down our daughters, our wives, our children, and our husbands, I mean, it's whatever. And it's very personal. And so I think those are important things to keep in mind.
Well, getting groped is always a personal thing.
It is.
We're not that jaded.
But we have what I want you to know though, is we have sheriffs now that have declared that if you complain, if you give them a legitimate complaint, so you're probably going to need to film it when you get groped, that they'll investigate it. Not where they're saying, like Texas, I think the way it was worded maybe a little bit inappropriately, that they're just going to be arrested. No, you investigate it. A law cannot declare you're going to be arrested, but you can guarantee that it gets investigated and then turned over to the proper authority.
I want to talk about how fast things have moved, how fast things are changing, and that's continuing to escalate. When I first started talking about this, it was maybe academic, but extreme. And of course, secession was considered extreme too, and not something people talked about in most conversations. But now, it's however extreme you want to say nullification is, or risky, it's not nearly as risky as doing nothing, which is a certainty that we're going to continue to go down the tubes and lose our liberty to an oppressive government. So that's something to compare. The risk of doing something. I mean, Winston Churchill said there are 4 stages in a fight for the right. Abbreviate all that. First is when you can win, it won't cost you anything. Second is when it'll cost you a lot, but you'll probably win. Third is it'll cost you a whole lot, and the chances are you may not win. Fourth is it'll cost you everything you've got, and you're going to lose, but you'd rather go down fighting than live as a slave. Well, I don't know where we are, but after this election, I'm saying we're probably in stage 3, and that's enough. We don't need to deteriorate any further because that's where we need to stand and fight. So whatever the risk, you're going to go head to head with the federal agents? Yeah, tell me an alternative. Tell me something else you can do.
It's a peaceful process. It's a peaceful process.
It starts out peaceful. I recognize that it can turn otherwise,
Yeah.
but we're entirely justified in continuing that defense, even if it turns to something other than peaceful. And I tell my secessionist friends this. By the way, is Larry Secede Kilgore here? I'm surprised. See, you follow me everywhere in my campaign. And by the way, I've changed my name. It's a Kathy Nullify Glass. But I tell my secessionist friends that if you think that you can more easily secede than you can return to constitutional government, you're dangerously wrong. And at least we ought to try this first and see if it works and then consider alternatives later, because I think this has the best option, the best chances of being successful if we stick together and just do it.
Could we actually hear, I was going to say, Clint Stutz, he has a piece
I
of
wanted
solution.
to briefly go back to the marijuana issue that Jason brought up. There's this meme going around Facebook where it has this, big heavy-set cop, and it says, at the top it says, if you smoke marijuana, it'll ruin your life. So if I catch you smoking marijuana, I'm going to throw you in jail and ruin your life. So really what's going to ruin your life is the cop putting you in jail, giving you a record, and ruining your life from there on out because you got a record, you can't get hired to get a job, and all that good stuff. So marijuana usage is, I'm not going to go smoke marijuana. I don't care if you do, though. And we have to realize that the federal government has no authority over marijuana, cocaine, heroin, anything like that. We had to pass an amendment to give them authority over alcohol, and we took that away from them. So if the states don't really buck up and realize that we can say, no, we're going to legalize at least marijuana in our state and stand up to the feds when they want to throw people in jail anyway, we're lost.
Can I springboard off that real quick? And then I just wanted to mention something about secession real quick. But with marijuana, you know, it's very important to understand what's really been happening. So we can trace the drug war back for quite some time, but it really got stepped up in the Nixon administration, the Reagan administration. But then what we started to see happening in the 90s is you have California, which then passes the first medical marijuana legislation. And 10 states passed it up to the time in 2005 where the Supreme Court ruled that doesn't matter. If a state passes a law, the federal government, even though they didn't pass a constitutional amendment like they had to with alcohol prohibition, if you grow 6 plants in your backyard and you consume them yourself, that is interstate commerce. I don't know how that all works, but and in 2005, that was said by the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas dissented in that opinion. He said, look, if this opinion stands, he says, we search the court's opinion in vain for what is reserved to the states and the people. If the federal government can legislate this activity, growing 6 plants in your backyard, every church rummage sale, bake sale can be legislated and regulated by the federal government. Clarence Thomas basically said, we've lost the republic in 2005. Now, a lot of people, conservatives now, think, oh, we lost it with the Obamacare ruling. Well, that actually set an enormous precedent to get the Obamacare ruling that we got. So with marijuana legislation, we need to understand that when the Supreme Court ruled that in 2005, 10 states had medical marijuana. None of them repealed those laws. And since then, 8 states have passed medical, and now we've got 2 of those states that have gone to recreational. So I believe that the fortress wall has a large hole in it in the drug war, and I think it's a generational reality that it's going to fall. The second thing that I want to say is about secession, and just with what Kathy said, is that we have a great opportunity. Because I got emails from people who were going to vote for Mitt Romney, were proud of it, and then 3 days later after he lost, talked about they signed a secession petition. And I'm like, these people are severely misguided if they thought the government was going to get so good under Romney that they weren't going to need to secede, you know? And so what we need to understand is even here in Texas, when the TSA legislation was put forward, what happened? The federal government said, we're going to turn Texas into a no-fly zone, and Rick Perry and all of his cronies peed their pants, and all the people that didn't have a backbone, and they backed down. Yep. So anybody in their right mind, and Texas is one of the only states where you see secede bumper stickers all over the place, and yet it's not individuals that secede from the Union. This would require acts of the state legislature and a convention and these different types of things. We're so far away from that reality when the TSA can get shut down by a threat from the feds that we have an opportunity to show people, look, secession is not a reality, and secession is surrender. It is removing yourself from the equation. The federal government can continue to run over all the rights of the states that remain in the Union. Nullification is the accountability. It's us saying, no, you go no further. So we've just got to, we have an opportunity to turn people onto this idea. They're sort of skipping a step. And we want to make sure that we can capitalize on that.
The Supreme Court has shown that it's not the remedy. People who think nullifying means suing, even though Sheriff Mack, he did fault the law and he won on this. But it could have gone the other way. And that's not the avenue. Greg Abbott thinks he can sue our way back to liberty. And he wins some and loses some, and then when he loses, he just says, oh, well, that's it, I did my best, there's nothing else that can be done. And our new incoming senator, Ted Cruz, I know for a fact, he thinks nullification is trying to go to the Supreme Court and convince them that you should be able to do this, and he thinks they're the final word. Well, they're not. The Supreme Court is an institution that can opine on the constitutionality of laws, but they're not the only one and they're not the final one. If I had to say one person who's been more destructive in America than any other person, I would say Antonin Scalia, because he knows the Constitution. And he has time after time, in the race case and in the marijuana case and all others, he has done things he has to know are unconstitutional and are going to destroy the Constitution. But he's put the prestige of his institution, time and time again, above his oath to the Constitution and the country. And I think that's something that I would love to be able to tell him. When you see what's going to happen, what's coming, you can blame yourself as much as any person alive, because you could have stopped it.
Well, and Kathy said a lot of true things there. And I would absolutely say now, in 1994, when I was a small town sheriff in Arizona, I sued the Clinton administration. And miraculously, I lived to tell about it. But I would not sue again. I really wish at the time I saw some sort of alternative. But if there had even been one other sheriff who had contacted me and one other in Arizona who would have said, yeah, we're with you, Mac. Let's just tell them no. And wouldn't it have been fun if we only have 15 sheriffs in Arizona and 12 of us were at the meeting when the BATF brought us our document that said we had to go along with the Brady Bill and what we had to do to comply with federal laws. And if we would have just got together and say, hey, you guys want to have some fun here? Why don't we just sign these documents they sent it and then tell them, sorry, we're not doing the Brady Bill in Arizona, and send it back to Washington and tell those BATF agents to come back in here and tell them to take this back to Janet Reno and Bill Clinton and Congress, and then let's let them all know, and let the, of course the press would have been all over it too the next day, and we'd just tell them, hey, we don't work for the federal government, they're not our boss, they can't tell us what to do. They literally told us in the Brady Bill, first time in U.S. history, that they came in and said, you're going to do what we tell you, you're going to pay for it, and if you don't, we're going to arrest you for failure to comply. They threatened to arrest us in this bill. I don't make any of it up. It's in this little booklet that's on the back table. This little booklet is the highlight of my Supreme Court decision. Would you like local officials to know? And I handed this personally to Abbott. Handed it to him. He said he was already familiar with it. Well, wouldn't you like to know, Attorney A.G. Abbott, wouldn't you like to know that the United States Supreme Court said that we have held, however, that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction? We're not subject to federal direction, okay? The federal government, we held, may not compel the states to enact or administer a federal regulatory program. Wow, and it gets bigger and better. Then he says, hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. What's the double security? That we have state sovereignty standing against the federal government. In fact, he compares state sovereignty, he says in here, he says it's one of the Constitution's structural protections of liberty. Not if we don't use it. What do you think that means? It says we retain an inviolable sovereignty. Texas is inviolably sovereign. And let me add just one other thing. He says, hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. State sovereignty is not here to protect the geographical boundaries of Texas, even though they're supposed to protect the border. State sovereignty is here to protect the sovereignty of the individual. Okay? And then he goes on. The different governments will control each other. We're a different government. We're supposed to be controlling the others. That is, my dear friends, nullification. And I, as a former undercover narcotics officer, I never thought I would say this, but 10 years ago, my total view of the drug war started to change big time. And I'm sorry, but absolutely, the drug war is the biggest farce there ever was. And if you think you want 700,000 cops in this country hell-bent on knowing what's in your pocket or what's in your glove compartment or what's in your chest of drawers at home, then you're as crazy as they are. I don't want that. I don't smoke pot. I'm not going to smoke it whether it's legal or not. But those laws against it are ridiculous and they're tyrannical.
Nullification to a muscle, a powerful muscle that is atrophied through disuse. So since we've not been used to doing this, it's sort of a problem. It could be that now we have to do it, and we have to do it on big things. I was hoping a couple of years ago that we could start out on some things and just get used to this, exercise that muscle, get it built up so that we had this structure and we were familiar with it. People would think it's that shocking, and I question whether we really have that luxury really to get in shape for the big events that are coming. But who knows?
I got a fight with you right now. I forgot.
Oh, you do?
This will add some
Is that on the
excitement.
schedule? Is that on the schedule?
Yeah.
No. That's 5 minutes.
Guess who wrote the decision in my case? Antonin Scalia. He got it right once. Now, he's actually been right before, but she's also right. But anyway, he did good, Rolando, on this one.
Okay, well, I guess somebody got to him now, because he certainly changed. But the balance of power that the Constitution envisioned was not through the 3 branches of government in Washington, D.C., and that we all learned about as school children. No, the essential balance of power was between the state governments and the federal governments. The states was what was supposed to keep the federal governments in line, and the states fell down. And of course, the nature abhors a vacuum, and Washington abhors anything it can't control. So they just rushed in and they've taken it all over. How do you just get this unwound? Well, I don't know, but we start with where we can and work from there. Because I don't see anything else in the horizon that's going to make a difference. Unless we're just determined or resigned to just go down and say, well, you know, America, that's a nice idea while it lasted. Now what are we going to do? No, there is no other place to go on earth. This is our last stand. This is freedom's last stand. And if we can't turn this thing around here, there's no place to run in the whole world, in mankind, and freedom as a concept. I feel will be lost. So that's the stakes here. And I'm sorry if I seem insistent and patient, but that's the way I see it. The stakes are just that huge, and we have very little time to actually get our act together.
I was just going to add, we were talking at dinner, the 2 most important elections, they're not in Washington, people. It's your sheriff and your governor. Okay.
Well, you were talking about Greg Abbott, who is probably going to run for governor. My wife and I were at the Texas Tribune Fest back in September, and I sat through the Health and Human Services track all day long. And he was the first person on the schedule. He spent 45 minutes telling us how he sued the government against the Obamacare bill, and he was telling us why he did it, and he was telling us why the decision was bad when it came down, and that was all good. Then we had a Q&A session, and the guy in front of me asked a question that I could not have thought of if I had tried, but it was ingenious. And he was obviously a liberal Democrat. He got up there and he said, Mr. Attorney General, so you don't like Obamacare, we get that, but do you think that Medicare and Social Security are unconstitutional as well?
Different.
And Abbott said, oh, I believe they're constitutional under the tax and spend clause, which is the general welfare clause, which is what justified Obamacare.
What an idiot.
So, how do we win with a guy like that if he's going to be our governor? And with the money he's got, he's probably going to win. So, that is definitely a very important election. We had a really good chance in 2010 to put either this nice lady in there or Deborah Medina, but we failed. And we got stuck with Rick Perry again. But y'all, it is important. Your county sheriff is highly important. Your governor is highly important. And, I mean, it's not looking good in the governor race. So
I agree with Clint that the governor is an important position. I mean, you need people in all areas of government, local government, Texas government, that's on board with this. But if you don't have leadership at the top, it's the executive that pushes this thing through. It's the executive that gives the order to stand tall, don't stand down. Just we've made this declaration now. We're going to stick to it. And without that leadership, then you're scattered and you're just left to the leadership abilities of various people. So that's exactly why I chose to run for governor, because I saw that as being the vacuum where we have to fill that, because I mean, we'll still do what we can in a scattered world, but...
I thought you were going to say, I agree with Clint, I should have won governor.
Mr. Rink, do you have anything to add?
Well, I guess the point of something that Sheriff Mack was talking about how the Supreme Court did get it right in that case, and the Supreme Court maybe has gotten it right a number of times or whatever, but that's really beside the point, because what we really need to really talk about and think about is it conceivable that the Founding Fathers would have fought a revolution, written a constitution, enumerated certain powers, and taken the time to actually put the Bill of Rights together, and then they would have turned that over, and in the Bill of Rights put the 9th and the 10th Amendment, which is essentially the safeguards of state sovereignty and individual sovereignty, and then they would have turned that over to the federal government and said, now go limit yourself, And if there's any question about constitutionality, we'll leave it up to one unelected lawyer in a black robe. I mean, when we really look at that structurally, it is completely opposed to the concept of federalism, opposed to the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is like the philosophy of the country, and then the Constitution is like the owner's handbook on how to run things, you know? And so the spirit of this nation is in nullification. And the idea is we seceded, for all practical purposes, from Great Britain, but we nullified, you know, the rule of Great Britain. And then, you know, there was another attempt to try to withdraw from an unconstitutional government, and you know, the South lost because it was an argument of force, I suppose. And a lot of people like to talk about nullification. They like to talk about you know, the sordid history of nullification and how nullification is connected to slavery and how nullification is about wanting to get back to those days. And that's totally insane. It's not even true. We deal with some of those arguments in here. And one of the things that I want to just take the time to talk about is how it is important to understand the constitutional history of this idea. To understand that in 1798, only 7 years after the ratification of the Bill of Rights, is when Madison and Jefferson started talking about this, because the Alien and Sedition Act was passed by President Adams. So we're not even out the chute, and the federal government is already trying to violate the Bill of Rights. This war and battle has been going on between the states and the federal government since the beginning. And so we need to make sure we understand the arguments against nullification. We need to understand the intellectual arguments for it, because most of the times people are throwing strawman arguments against it because all they've heard is from their public school education, from Rachel Maddow, or even from the people on the conservative side, the Heritage Foundation, which hates nullification, because conservatives and Democrats both like centralized power, initiating their agenda across 310 million people.
When people hear I'm from Georgia, they just assume I must be in favor of secession. I tell them, no, we're another secession. We're not finished with the last one yet in Georgia. And that's pretty much true, because the stories that you grow up with about the suffering and what happened. And I think about it and I say, secession now, think of it. Think of Sherman with drones.
Right.
And it's not going to be as pleasant as the last unpleasantness was.
Right.
These people are brutal. They have a willingness to kill that I don't think would have been tolerated in the Civil War era. So that's why I say that Americans won't fire on other Americans. I say, well, I think they did pretty much in the last secession. And I think people are different now, and they will again. Or you can't count on the fact that they won't. And with the drones, human action has sort of been taken out of the equation. So this is something that I say, people just seem to have an emotional response, and because they don't know that nullification is an option, that's the only thing and I understand the sentiment. I know that it is emotion, it's raw emotion based on logic, but it's emotion. It's like, I'm done with this. I am just so done with this. It's like a divorce, when that moment when the light switch just turns off and all you want is out. That's all you want is out. You don't want to talk to them, you don't want to see them, it's over. And I understand that, but they're not thinking it through, like, okay, you secede, and then what? You think they're just going to let Texas go with our oil and gas reserves and all the other things that they covet? No, I think it's going to be a fight one way or another, but I'd rather stand and fight on constitutional grounds than any other ground.
Just a moment. I just want to tell you all we have 5 minutes left of open conversation.
I have to say, though, that I totally agree with Jason. The founders did not create a system after fighting a war to stay away from everything that now our government is doing. And to think that they established a 9-member oligarchy saying, right, you get to say what freedom is and what liberty is for every individual in the country. And you know what we're dealing now with is creating sheriffs who actually would say, where the Supreme Court has totally blown it, like you mentioned, they do all the time. And so, for instance, if say, well, tell Roberts to come out here and enforce what he said then. But you know what? He doesn't run this county. And as long as I'm the sheriff of this county, the IRS is not going to come in and force people to comply with Obamacare idiocies. And I've announced publicly that I will never take Obamacare or do anything close to it, so that when time comes, if the IRS tries to plunder my bank account or anything else from me, I'm not going to comply, and I'm not going to pay any fines for it, and I expect that my sheriff would defend me. And this is the same story I bring up in my books, is ask your sheriff, would you have arrested Rosa Parks for failing to give her seat to a white man? And then if he says, well, I have to enforce the law, then you know you got a loser. But if he says, no, I wouldn't have, and I would have escorted her home safely, then why won't you do the same today? It's the same exact principle. And you want to use that story and that historical aspect of American civil disobedience a lot. It's peaceful and it's effective, and it's something that we really start paying attention to.
You know, I wanted to say, just on that, I've got a good friend named Jim Babko who runs an organization called Downsize DC. They're a great organization. He says every political debate comes down to you and what army. And we do talk about how the federal government does have the guns and the force and everything. But you know what? They're also broke. They also are living on borrowed time. And they also can't enforce their unconstitutional laws and mandates without the cooperation of the law enforcement officials at the state level.
Yeah.
So that's why some of these more nonviolent issues, like marijuana, is a really great issue to nullify. Because are they going to turn the tanks on the pot smokers? Well, they might, okay? I'm not going to put it past them, but that seems like it's going a little bit far. And so what we're doing, and what we're seeing in these states, and what we're seeing in Seattle, is that the feds have stood down so far. Barack Obama has used the Department of Justice and the IRS to wage the war on medical marijuana more than George Bush did. But the point is that to a certain degree, these states are saying, okay, let's see you try it. I mean, in Denver, there was more dispensaries than Starbucks in 2011, okay? When you start getting into the sheer numbers, the federal government's going to have to play whack-a-mole with these dispensaries. It's not going to work. And so that's why I think, what Sheriff Mack's talking about, what Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers talks about getting the police and military and veterans on the side of the people, very important, because it allows us to get to basically call the federal government's bluff and say, look, we're going to smoke pot. Why don't you come and stop us? And is Roberts going to come do it? Is Obama going to come?
Yeah,
No.
make Roberts do it.
They send their thugs out there to do it. The police and military who don't know what it means, what their oath to the Constitution means, who all they're going to do is follow orders. That's who they're going to lean on to do it. That's why we need to make sure we're reaching out to those people.
Something I try to emphasize when I'm talking to a group of people about nullification, the first thing I try to emphasize is that you have to understand that Washington is lost.
That's right.
If you think that another election or even another midterm election is going to change the tide, look no further than the Tea Party class of 2010. You have one person who on the Club of Growth's index scored a 100%. That was Justin Amash. And he's up there right now getting his butt whooped by Boehner, getting thrown off of a committee because he kept voting wrong for some reason. He didn't vote with the guys that want to keep on raising the debt limit. But you have to understand that the Tea Party class of 2010, as massive as it was a huge failure. And the poster boy of it was Alan West. This guy voted for CISPA, for the Patriot Act, for all this other bad stuff. And yeah, I mean, maybe the Democrat that beat him is no better than him, but no big loss. I'm sorry, I'm not going to miss Alan West. But if you think that another election is going to save Washington, that it's going to turn the tide, that finally we're going to get some change in Washington, please slap yourself hard. You have to focus on state and local government. We have to get thoroughly involved in everything around us in this state. And I have to say, I'm guilty for the past, well, I've only been active for probably 4 years. I'm guilty of the past 3 years of being really focused on national stuff, and I've just, in the past few months, gotten really focused on state stuff, and this is where I'm staying. I'm not going to venture off to the Washington stuff again. I'm here to stay in the state realm.
Our line in the sand is in the shape of the state of Texas.
Thank you. All right, that ends the open conversation segment. At this point, we'll give each participant another 2 minutes to cover anything you feel was missed. So, all right, I will start with Mr. Ring.
I guess I just want to say that, and I'm not just doing this to promote my film, but I think it's important. The most important thing that I wanted to try to do with this film was have a way for people to learn about the concept of decentralized government. See, we're talking about nullification, we're talking about all these things, but we've got to shift people's mindset to local and state control over things that are very personal in their lives. We've got to do everything we can to get people to stop looking to Washington, D.C. to fix the problem. I mean, I think it was George Washington who said, once all power is centralized in Washington, D.C., we're looking to them for everything, we've lost the revolution all over again. We fought it for nothing. And so anything we can do to get our neighbors and our friends and people in our sphere of influence to start thinking about what decentralized power really means, how our lives would be so much better if government was decentralized and closer to us. One of the things I like to talk to people about is that when the Constitution was ratified, the average federal representative represented 30 to 50,000 individuals. Now it's like 500,000. So look at the difference in representation. That's actually closer to what the representation is on our state government. And so it's much more easy to turn the tide there. The other thing I like to talk about is how when NDAA was passed, within 4 months, I think there was 10 or 12 states who were already gearing up to try to nullify it in some way, shape, or form. When's the last time you saw a bad federal law get changed, or even start to get changed within 4 months back to the good, or get it repealed? No, it takes forever to get anything done at the federal level, if it gets done. So these are just some of the things we want to always focus back on.
Well, I guess I just gave my 2-minute final thing a while ago, but I just want to emphasize again, get involved as much as you can at the state capitol during this session. We've got the TSA bill already filed, the NDAA bill is already filed. We're going to get our Obamacare bill to the Texas Legislative Council this coming week. It's going to be filed hopefully pretty soon. We need your phone calls, your emails, your faxes, your personal visits up there to Austin and to also district offices as well. Don't discount that. We need your feet on the ground. And if we don't show ourselves up there, they're not going to know that it matters.
Well, Jason asked, you and what army? Okay, that's an important consideration because that's what the feds are thinking. We got an army and they don't. Well, when I ran for governor, one of my platforms was to secure the border, not using a fence, not using a drone, but using the Texas State Guard, our state militia. And if you haven't read up on that, you should. And I said that but for border security, I said also for emergencies. Because we should not ever let FEMA come into our state again. Because they will make up stuff, they will create situations, they will exploit it. And all the stuff that they're doing, they're buying all the bullets and everything, it's for a purpose. So just don't let them come in, but we need something to take the place. And we need a state guard, which is under the total control of the governor, can never be nationalized, can never be sent outside of our state. We need a force like that, made of citizens, because they're not full-time, they just get called up. They do maneuvers, they get training, they go to their jobs, and then they get called up, the way militia used to work. And to be there for whatever defense of the state of Texas we need, and that's our army.
In True Grit, John Wayne said, one of my favorite lines, when the girl was showing a lot of spunk, swimming back across the river to come back after they tried to get rid of her, he looks at her and he goes, She reminds me of me. I like to say that to all three of them here. They really remind me of a lot of things that I've said and a lot of things that I've written. And in my sheriff book, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, you need to go ask your sheriff if he's been to our convention, if he has the book, if he's read the book, and ask him if he's willing to be a constitutional sheriff. You know, all you're asking him is if he'll keep his word. And then he'll keep his oath that is required by the supreme law of the land to swear allegiance to our Constitution, and thus the God-given rights that we were blessed with when we were born here as Americans. The very first page of the book, I quote Jefferson, and he asks, "When all government shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided and become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated." Have we reached that point? We're way beyond it. But the question remains, to whom can you turn for peace, safety, and protection when government becomes venal and oppressive? If not the very individual in your state or in your county, even better, in your own home area, to the very public official that you paid and you hired, who promised you in God's name that he would uphold, defend, and protect your Constitution. And you don't really have constitutional rights because they're not granted by the Constitution. The Constitution is there to protect what you already had by nature, as quoted in the Declaration of Independence. And we must realize that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution apply today. And if they don't, please ask your sheriff, what else could you do that's more important in your job than standing for liberty? Please show me the program. Please show me. Is it the drug war? Yeah, we can't protect your land, and we can't protect your home, and we can't protect your children from an overzealous government because we're too busy fighting the drug war. Well, for God's sakes, then get off that stupid drug war and do something of value.
All right, it looks like we have about 40 minutes for questions from the audience. A few ground rules first. Please stand up, introduce yourself, list any affiliations you have, and ask a question. Please don't preface it. Please don't, share about a book you've written and give us an encyclopedia. We're all very knowledgeable people, so please give us a question and tell us if it's to one member of the panel or to all of them. So, who's first? Kurt?
Hi, my name is Kurt Hildebrand from Case County. I just want to thank everybody on the panel for this fantastic conversation. This is my preface, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's a
Very
conversation and a fantastic job. There's something I want to hone in on a little bit. It's been touched on and kind of danced around, but the specific mechanism in Kathy's words of enforcement. We've talked about the safeguard, we've talked about just saying no. There's been a few other things that have kind of been touched on, but then the reference was also made to even just the threat of the no-fly zone. And there's a lot of ways other than deploying the tanks and deploying the drones that the federal government can exert pressure and leverage and can bring the states, to bear. So I just want to know, how do we enforce nullification? How do we really do that?
I think you force the laws that are being broken just as you would against anybody else, and the fact that it's a federal agent that's doing it should be irrelevant. Let's take the Bastrop fires of last year. Our firefighters were told by the FEMA and the feds to stand down. Firefighters came all over Texas to help fight that fire, and the feds told them to go away. Well, if we had a good constitutional sheriff there, and if our governor hadn't been running around trying to become president, then they would have got down there and they said, no, feds, we'll handle this. If we need your help, we'll call you, but you stand down. And if you don't, you are interfering with firefighters and other officers doing their duty, and we have laws against that. And you'll be arrested, and you'll be taken to jail, and you'll be prosecuted. And if you're found guilty, you'll be incarcerated. The fact that you're employed by the federal government is irrelevant. And of course, the feds think that they are immune from these things, so they're saying, no, you're in Texas, and we're going to apply a Texas law and Texas remedies to this. And then you see, whether they back down or not, but at some point, I think you've got to follow through and actually put some Fed in jail.
Well, and I think you didn't specifically mention this, but you've got the problem of federal funds. So the federal government's not the only one that's broke and living on borrowed time. Many states and municipalities are also broke, have become dependent on federal dollars. It's part of that budget. So this is a real problem. This comes up a lot. There's been talk. No one's actually done this yet, but states have talked about, and is there a way we can escrow those funds and only send them on to the federal government for certain constitutional purposes, different things like that, different ways to try to prevent the federal government from withholding those federal funds. I think the most important thing that a state can do in this realm is what like the state of Utah did, which they passed a piece of sound money legislation, which has different aspects of how gold and silver can be used, legal tender, but I think what's actually happening in the background is the state of Utah is sort of building their own sovereign wealth that is not attached to the Federal Reserve note. And I know a lot of times we think that we're going down the tubes, in 12 months, we don't have any time. But what can happen is that the state of Utah can get to the place where if the federal government says, well, we're not going to give you any more of these Federal Reserve notes, they say, well, they've actually devalued to the point that we don't care, and we have our own sovereign wealth, thank you very much. So I think that's why that is somewhat important.
Thank you. Kurt, did you intend that question for the entire panel or just Ms. Glass?
Yeah, it was just a general question for whoever
Okay,
wanted to answer.
then proceed.
Just one other follow-up on that, what Kathy was stating. The federal government actually has done that in lots of states. It wasn't just Texas fires. They did it in Arizona. They did it just recently last year in New Mexico. They tell local professional firefighters, albeit some of them volunteers, but very professional, know what they're doing, well trained, they can't help put out the fires. Now, if we can't get any more insane than that, and our own government said, we're here to help you, but we're not going to let your fires stop. We're going to guarantee the perpetuity of the fires. That's how crazy, and yet we keep electing all these idiots that let this continue.
Mr. Stutz, do you want to add something?
Well, Kathy actually stole my thunder, so.
She always does.
Next question. I think Mr. Rowland had his hand up.
John Rowland, Constitution.org. I'd like for each of the members of the panel to define nullification. It's easy to throw the word around, but let me suggest that it is not simply making a resistance gesture, that it is what happens when law enforcement abandons its effort because they're not getting the cooperation they either cannot proceed without or cannot do so without great expense or risk. Do you agree with that, and can you elaborate on it?
Thank you.
I think that's a pretty good definition at its core. Pretty much it's noncompliance with unconstitutional federal acts. And noncompliance can come in many forms, but then you've got the threat of force from the federal government trying to force you to comply, and that's when the resistance comes in. And of course, we're going to be nonviolent for as long as we can, and if we have to respond, we will respond whatever way is appropriate.
I think that's an important question, John, or to get that clarification, because I tend to, the 10th Amendment Center tends to use it in a very big tent sense, because if you want to get down to brass tacks, it's a legislative act or an act that has to do with the executive branch or with law enforcement or anything like that. But I tend to use it in a larger sense where we're talking about noncompliance from the individual all the way up to the state level and that sort of thing. So when you are hearing it used, it is sometimes not used in as specific a format as what John's talking about. And that would be technically what it is. So.
Yes, and it can be passive and it can be active.
Right.
If there is an act that you need to take to make this federal unconstitutional act happen, then you just don't take it. Like Texas, we're just not going to set up those exchanges, which Obama tax requires. So we're not going to do it, and that's a nullification. But it can be an active sentence, like for this thing to work, this unconstitutional act to work, you need to not do something. Or if you put something in the cogs of the wheels and you're in a position that you can do that, then that's active nullification.
Yes, there's another synonym to it, several. One is state sovereignty. Another one is the doctrine of interposition. And Jefferson, thank you, Jefferson and Madison spoke about those in their Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, respectively. And they actually said that it is the duty of state legislatures and state officials to interpose themselves on behalf of the people. And when you, I'm going to guarantee you something, we keep talking and tiptoeing around the keeping it peaceful thing. I guarantee you, if your sheriffs get involved in this process, this will remain peaceful. And if they have the guts to interpose themselves on your behalf, whether it remains peaceful or not, they still have the obligation and the duty to do just that. And it's called, this is what it looks like. You federal agents, you're not going to do that in this county. Period.
Backing up a bit, this is for the whole panel. What do we do about the fact that a substantial portion of people in this country would rather be taken care of than be free?
Well, I don't think it takes a majority. It didn't take a majority. I mean, how many people were at the Alamo? It certainly wasn't a majority. I bet Roger Gary knows exactly. But, and
86 were killed.
yes, and but they changed the course of history. In the American Revolution, how many was that? A third at most, actively doing. So we don't have to wait until we have won over public opinion for this. And I would say we can't wait. So we just have to band together and do something, and just showing that there is something we can do, that something that can have an effect, can be what turns other people around and says that they're not resigned to their fate if they see some course that has this type of potential.
I think it's the tireless, irate minority that gets things done in this country. Small groups, and actually, you know, you get some small groups that form coalitions with other small groups, and you have a pretty massive group then, but the tireless, irate minority is really what gets things done. And just as an illustration of that, I asked a question on a Facebook group. I said, if y'all want to get together and talk about nullifying Obamacare, drop me a line. And one person responded out of that particular group, and then from her efforts, we got a big group going. We got like 400 and something members in the group right now signed up to help us. And it just, you know, using social media, went from a very small group to a pretty large group. And it's just amazing how the grassroots does work.
I wanted to say real quick on that because it was kind of about the entitlement system and, you know, voting. Well, I mean, it's cool. It's all relative, but Chalmers Johnson, I think, said this one time about, I think, the American Empire, but things that can't last forever don't. And the bottom line is like the entitlement, we're underfunded by like 2 times the GDP of the entire world or something like that. You know, it's like totally insane. It can't go on, right? So I think the real question is, I don't know that we're going to be able to get enough people convinced to win the argument. I think it's about what happens when the entitlement system fails. What happens when it begins to be evident that people aren't going to get what they thought they were going to get? Do we have enough educated people to sort of step into that vacuum and begin to say, hey, there's another alternative other than more centralized power. There's another alternative than the path that got us to where we're at right now, which is the fact that we're heading into a collapse. And so I think it's the fact that it's going to collapse under its own weight is the only way that's going to change. and we need to be prepared for that. I don't know what that's going to ultimately mean.
And I also will say that if we get a third of the sheriffs, even close to a third of the sheriffs doing this, we're gonna win.
Heather?
Yes, I'm Heather Fazio. I'm membership coordinator for the Libertarian Party of Texas. I also work with Texans for Accountable Government, and we look forward to working during the legislative session. I'd like to thank you all for being here. It's been really great to hear the diversity in the discussion, where you're coming from and your backgrounds. We've talked a lot about nullifying federal laws and using state government to do so. But there's a lot of tyranny that we're seeing coming from the state government. So how do we, as free human beings that live on this planet, nullify the tyranny that we're seeing coming from our state legislature?
I'm gonna beat the dead horse, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record. Your sheriff, your sheriff, your sheriff. He can stand against them too. He doesn't work. Who does the sheriff work for? He works for you and under the promise to protect your freedom. And it doesn't matter where the threat comes from. I'm sorry, it doesn't. And he lives in your neighborhood. And if he wants to keep his job, he's going to try to please you. And you better be working with him. And he better hear from you tomorrow. You know, what? Tomorrow's Sunday. Well, go to church with him. But go take him some cookies and ask him these questions. Will you be a constitutional sheriff? Are you? You know, do you already have the book? We sent this book to every sheriff in the country. And some sheriffs in Texas have received 4, 5, 6, 7 copies. And so, yeah. Well, there's another one. Yeah, and a lot of them do need some, and we're not going to get every sheriff. But we are going to get some, and we're already getting them. I can show you stories. Go to our website, cspoa.org, and you're going to see more. They're talking about in the books. And I picked up another book this week called They Fired the First Shot. And I was in Alabama where this guy wrote the book. The book's like that, 700 pages. But he talks about other sheriffs in there that I didn't even know about that are doing this. This is real, folks. This is not pie in the sky, okay? We have sheriffs doing this. Brad Rogers did threaten to arrest federal agents coming in his county, and they backed off, okay? And so this can happen. You get a courageous sheriff who knows and understands the Constitution and principles of liberty that we were founded upon. We're going to take America back, county by county and state by state. If the state doesn't catch on, fine. Live in freedom in your county.
I think to your point as well, like so you're sort of getting at, are there non-governmental solutions to fight back against government? So number one, we do have the power to change the face of the state legislature because the representation is still small enough that we can have an impact. I think it's probably helpful to get people like David Simpson in there, who then can get in there and sort of evangelize other representatives. I think peer-to-peer outreach is helpful in that capacity. So I think that's what needs to happen, is we need to try to multiply guys like that, whether through election or through conversion. The other thing is I think, Antonio Beeler, who heads up the Peaceful Streets Project, right? There's a guy who encountered a situation in his life and has taken that and turned it into a way to hold police accountable and to turn the tables. And so it may not, I don't know what it is, but there may be the equivalent of the Peaceful Streets Project that can happen. I don't know what that is. Nobody knew what that was till it happened. You see what I'm saying? And so what we're talking about is, how do we create an environment of pain for representatives when they take away our liberty? Because that's what politicians understand, is pain. And I'm not saying that in the physical sense. I'm talking about it in a political sense. How can we use the media, the grassroots, our own power, and leverage that against those people? So I think we've just got to be ingenious about that. We've got to try to change the complexion of the representation and then find ways to make it painful for them to violate our rights.
I think the problem you're describing is partly attributable to the fact that there's so much attention that goes to Washington. Mm-hmm. And like I said before, you got to write them off. And you got to focus all your attention on state government and local government. like the sheriff said, you've got to have a good sheriff in your county that'll, you know, at least not enforce the unjust laws coming out of Austin. For example, you know, they have the vampire cops, you know, that take your blood, and that's terrible. You've got red light cameras, you got to have some resistance against that. But we have to really shift our focus from federal, focus all on state and local. You can't, I mean, nullification, like we said earlier, comes in different forms, and of course you can't nullify as state law really, because there's nowhere to do that in your local government really. But you can passively not comply with it and have a sheriff that's worth a darn to back you up. So.
Well, I don't know that you can't nullify a state law. It's an interesting question, Heather. I mean, we've got a Texas Constitution. If we just are nullifying unconstitutional federal acts, well, hey, that's what our Constitution's for. But I agree that for a while, it might be that we're working on, as a state, to try to be the balance against the federal government. But once we get this muscle built up and strong and vigorous, I don't think we're ever going to let it go flabby and get out of shape again. So once we're finished with the feds, it's like, don't you mess with me, state of Texas.
That's right.
So I think that can happen. Once we've got in this habit, this mindset, I don't think it's going to go away.
Right now in Texas, MAD, Mothers in Truck Driving, is trying to get back to where we can do roadblocks. And it's against the law in Texas. I was proud as heck of Texas on that. I'm against them. They're wrong. They're Nazi-ish. And that's exactly what they are. They're Gestapo tactics. And so if it passes in Texas, because MAD really pushed for it, then the sheriff of the county can say, well, we're not doing them here. He still can. I told my deputies not to write fines and citations for people wearing seatbelts. It's on my website. You can see it yourself. We never did. I never did in 20 years of law enforcement write one single ticket for a failure to wear a seatbelt. I don't have to. And these sheriffs know. Listen, folks, they are the ones that will decide what is and what is not enforced in your county.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
You had your hand up for a while. Are
I
you
did.
done?
No, but my name is Mark Tippett. I was Travis County candidate for Travis County judge last go around. I have two questions. The first one's for Kathy. Are you going to run again?
I decline to answer this.
The second one is a bit more complicated. I get asked a lot about the nullification issue, what it is, how it works, how the mechanics of it work. And I've been kind of doing a layman's job of explaining it. I would like if the panel could explain it to me. This is how I've been explaining it, and I'm sure I'm way off, is that the state legislature must pass a bill saying we will not honor and we nullify this federal bill, act, mandate, whatever. And then if the federal government comes in and arrests somebody for violating that law, here's where I get stuck. Who protects me? Because as what they point to is an issue that happened in Montana, where a guy was growing marijuana for medicinal purposes, and I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And it was, he even brought the governor in, he brought the news media in, and everybody was just applauding his deal. Federal government came in and now he's in prison probably for life. Who protects the individual once a state nullifies, and I know it's the sheriff, that much is, but would the state have enough teeth to say, federal government, get the heck out of here, we've nullified this?
And is that a question for the whole panel?
It's for the whole panel, yeah.
Okay.
Or whoever can answer it best for me. That's.
Well, I think we should give everyone a shot. I will ask that we try to keep it brief because as you saw, we have a lot of people who want to ask questions.
Can I make a quick, and this would be 30 seconds. I did want to say that, and I haven't been in Texas really that long, two and a half years, but like in Ohio, and I believe in Seattle and I'm not sure, or in Washington State, Colorado, ballot initiatives are used in many states to do these type of things. So with Obamacare in Ohio last November, they amended the Constitution in the state of Ohio that made the individual mandate, null and void. So it's not just the legislature. If there's a ballot initiative process, that can also be used. So I just want to mention that.
And who would protect the people from Ohio when the federal
Let
government
me hand
comes
that
and
off,
says-
and let me hand it off. Let some other people talk, and I can address it if they don't.
Well, I agree, that it's not just one way, and there may be ways that we haven't thought of yet. Yes, the legislature can pass a law or a resolution. Missouri, I remember, did it by referendum of the people. I think the governor can make a proclamation or an executive order that this act violates existing state law, and that we expect that's going to be prosecuted. So, but I think it does take some sort of official pronouncement from the state in some way that says this is our stand. Puts the people on notice that you better not do this because we have laws. Most of these things that we're talking about, there are laws that exist, and you can just apply the penalties that go with that law as far as the enforcement mechanism. Now it's up to the county DA and the county sheriff to actually make, and the local law enforcement to prosecute those laws, but that's where it gets started. And I think that what I want Clint to talk about, I hope, is what is in his bill to put teeth within that bill, so that this is something that we need to know how it's going to be enforced. But I think it does start with some sort of proclamation that we take this stand. Now, these other random acts of nullification, it's just things that could just come up, like things that the county sheriffs have been doing, or other people, county clerks, that says, no, you can't file that in my county, because they see that it's not consistent with their understanding of the Constitution. So these things can come up randomly, but to get it going on a wide-scale basis, as a practical matter, I think it does take an executive or some way that the state of Texas can say, this is what we're going to do, and beware, don't do this in our state.
I think in general, to have the most protection for an individual, you gotta have, number one, a constitutional sheriff, and number two, a governor that's gonna actually, send the word down from on high that this is the law in the state, that it shall be enforced this way. And, from local and county law enforcement and state law enforcement. That's the only way to get the ultimate protection for an individual in the state. So if a federal agent comes in and tries to take someone to a holding cell somewhere in that state, they're not going to have a very easy time of it, because our law enforcement is going to take care of it in a different way. But specifically on the bill that we've been working on, we have a mechanism. It's, Tom Glass has been invaluable to our working group. His idea was to set up roadblocks for the enforcement of the taxes. I'm sorry. It's more of a metaphor, but we're going to set up roadblocks for IRS agents. We're going to take their blood and test it.
We like those.
Find any blood.
Just arrest them as soon as they cross the line.
But we have made it so that they have a different process to go through to file a notice of federal tax lien or to execute levies in Texas. And if they don't go through that process, they are subject to a Class B misdemeanor. And basically, it's preliminary procedures before they can file a lien or execute a levy. If they don't go through the preliminary procedures, they have not followed our law. And currently in the law right now as it stands, there is a procedure set out for how and where they can file a notice of federal tax lien. We've just added something to it above where it starts. So we did make it a Class B misdemeanor, and if they don't follow our procedures, they're going to get in trouble. And we have to have an executive, and we have to have a sheriff and local law enforcement that are going to follow our law.
Okay, real quickly, ask yourself what you're asking, and what all of you need to ask the same question. Constitutionally and technically, who enforces the 10th Amendment?
Yeah.
The federal government? Who enforces state sovereignty? Are you really waiting for Barack Obama to pick a state sovereignty czar? That's probably not going to happen, folks. That is ours. That belongs to every person in Texas, you, we the people. This is our government. Those are the first three words of the Constitution. We the people. And then you have other local officials. Every local official is responsible to protect and defend state sovereignty, local autonomy, and states' rights. Ask yourself, ask any attorney, ask anybody in government, who is in charge, constitutionally and technically and lawfully, of defending, protecting, and preserving the 10th Amendment and state sovereignty.
Don't ask a lawyer.
There's your answer.
Hey,
I'd like to hear a stupid attorney try to answer that one. The federal government's in charge of defending state sovereignty. Really?
I need 1 minute, because that's great. And I just want to say, we got a real life example of this, all right? And we tell the story in the movie Nullification, but in the 1850s, Joshua Glover was a runaway slave from St. Louis. He went to Illinois, and the fugitive slave law was a federal law that said you had to return runaway slaves. So that owner went up there, got a guy, they busted in, they took him, they got him put into jail in Wisconsin, okay? And the people of Wisconsin, they got mad. There was a newspaper man who ran his printer and put flyers out there, and 5,000 people went to that jail and busted him out. What did they do? They sent him 7 safe houses till he got to Canada. So they got him away. And then when the federal government tried to prosecute the people who helped him, the state of Wisconsin said, we're not going to turn over the papers. This is the state of Wisconsin. You have no authority here. So the point is it's not just one guy, it's not one person, it's not one thing. It's everybody. It's an organic process of the people of a state standing with their fellow citizens.
And think of random acts of nullification. Think of Rosa Parks.
Yep.
I mean, she didn't plan that. Nobody planned it. She just had some point where, I don't know, she ever saw it coming and said, I've had enough. I've had enough. I'm not going to comply. She wasn't a constitutional scholar. It's just in her gut. She said, this isn't right, and I'm not doing it anymore. Well, that's no.
We should have never heard of Rosa Parks. We should have heard of the sheriff that took her home.
Thank you. All right, one more question, fortunately. Shoot. There we go.
George McGuire, Brindle, Texas. It's been a long time since the states have gone together and evaluated the job that the federal government is doing. That's where the power is in the states. Not one state against the federal government, but all the states against the federal government. We all have the same problem.
Is there a question?
How do we do it?
I guess this is the whole panel.
I think we've answered that question tonight. I think again, it's a grassroots effort, and you've got to focus on that. Every one of you, make sure you get involved in the local area, in your local area, and talk to your sheriff, get to know him, find out if he will become a constitutional sheriff. If he won't, you got to replace him, or move to a place where you might be able to have that happen. And I think maybe real quickly we can maybe get that last question back there.
All right, Laura.
Actually, just sort of a follow-up question to what you guys were talking about right before this was, I worry about counties like Bear County, which has like a large city police force, as well as a county sheriff. And what happens if your city police, like in San Antonio, Bear County, are enforcing those no refusal laws? But the county sheriff, I mean, I know for a fact that they don't enforce it.
What?
So that, because working with Normal, that was what Normal was one of their biggest issues that they talked about. It's like, what do we do about this? Like, the city cops are enforcing the no refusal, but the county's deputies are not.
A good constitutional sheriff's going to be expanding her authority now, because you just got Susan Permelo elected there, who's a former two-star general, and she's indicated that she wants to learn about this constitutional stuff. She asked me for my endorsement. But a constitutional sheriff is going to be working with those other chiefs of police, and you got to remember though, those chiefs of police are bureaucrats, and they answer to a town council or town manager or whatnot. The sheriff can still go into the entire county and start talking to these other chiefs and say, look, you guys, if I'm doing this and you're not, and vice versa, then this isn't going to work. We've got to get down to brass tacks here. You guys took the same oath to the Constitution as I did. Let's get, and a good sheriff is going to start having influence on that. But you bring up a good point. It's one that's lasted a long time in this country. You know, are chiefs and sheriffs gonna get together and do the same thing, or are they gonna get along? And it's always been a problem, but once this snowball starts rolling, those chiefs are gonna have to catch on, or they're gonna get left in the dust. So, anyway, good question.
I'm afraid that's it for questions. We do have one more thing to do tonight. Pat Dixon, could you come up?
I just want to thank all the panelists and Carolyn Goldman for moderating. Also want to thank Jim Stuntsman. Are you in the room? He's not in the room, but he kind of arranged this thing, so I want to thank him as well. I hope you enjoyed tonight, and I hope you'd like to see more of these. This was something we started a few months ago to try to have more of these forums and have an opportunity to discuss issues like this, and we'd like to continue it. But we did pay for this room tonight, and we're hoping that we can have your support to keep doing this. So Heather back here, if you'd like to make a donation so that we can keep doing these kinds of forums, keep doing the activities that we do, Heather has donation forms. I'd ask you to support us, and that way we can keep this thing going and work on important issues like this. So I just want to thank you for being here tonight. Please consider supporting us tonight so we can keep doing this work. Thank you.
Also, I want to just mention real quickly, I've got actually another appointment that I've got to get ready for tonight, and I've got some other things I have to do tonight, and I've got a 2-hour drive. So any of you do want the books, please get them, and I'm going to be ducking out of here.
I just want to respond to this gentleman's question before we break up about can the states get together. Unfortunately, I'm afraid they can't. Just like we don't have to get everybody on our side, a committed few can do this. I think we can just control what we can control and focus on Texas. But if we set an example, there are other states out there. There's some states that are hopeless, just like Washington's broken. They're hopeless. But they will improve as they see a better example. And there are other states out there who are actually ahead of us in this game. And so we can combine with like states to make a front, but we don't have to wait on anybody else. If it's only one state that's going to do this, but it's Texas, that's good enough, and we'll start right there and build.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.